So, recording has started again, and this is yours. Okay, great. So it's my pleasure to present Andrea Tosti. Today he's going to give his lecture in person here in Lancaster. And Andrea is a researcher here, and his area of expertise is comics, and he's going to show us how comics can be used to explain complex phenomena. So I'm looking forward to this. Yes, okay.
Hello, I am Andrea. I'm Italian, and I'm not a polyglot at all. I'm still struggling with English, but I'm working on it. But I can consider myself sort of visual polyglot because I'm studying how images and especially comics can be used for scientific teaching and dissemination. All we know that images help us to illustrate scientific content for centuries, but I'm trying to understand how comics can help us to explain complex phenomena in science teaching and dissemination. Comics have been used as a teaching aid for at least a century, especially regarding the language teaching and more generally the humanities, especially for children, for support for children education and for reluctant readers. But in this kind of comics, usually the text is predominant in the images that are relegated to an illustrative role. However, visual media, and especially comics, can be have enormous possibilities regarding science teaching and dissemination. Today, I will show to you not so many scientific comics. However, I will try to explain how the rhetorical possibilities of existing comics can be fruitfully applied to scientific discourse. Let's start. On the left side, you can see 4 pages from the Cartoon History of the Universe by Larry Gordick, probably the most famous popular science comics maker of all time. And on the right, you can see 4 pages from Alpha Direction by John Salve. On the Cartoon History of the Universe, these 4 pages describes what happened just after the Big Bang, birth of the universe. As we can see, the written text is predominant, is a prominent role over the images that they add just some visual information, but mostly in the form of suggestion. They are more illustrative than descriptive, and they also furnishing a humoristic touch, currently with the supposed comic nature of comics. In another page, you can see another specific elements of this kind of comics: the presence of a visible narrator, also commonly called a talking head. This element, very common, for example, in graphic journalism or in many academic comics too, introduce anthropomorphization and in order to create an engagement with the reader. But once again, the discourse is carried out by the speech, so by the word. I want to be clear, the comics by Larry Gordick is a very good product, it's very clear, and despite the humorous style is very accurate under the same profile. But comics can do much more to merge images and text on the same support. As I said, on the right side, we can see 4 pages from Alpha Direction, another story of the universe, but in a different form. The moment depicted here is the same moment that the comics are Larry Loring illustrated, so a few seconds after the Big Bang, but the style, as you can see, is completely different. The first things that you can see is there isn't text, written text on it. It will be in another part of the book, but it's not necessary here because the paratextual elements of the book allow us to understand what we are seeing. Okay. To put it differently, in the first example that I showed, the hierarchical relationship between images and written text is very similar to that of an illustration or academic text. So the images illustrate, but the words carry out the message. And additionally, the approach to the reader is more didactic. As a reader, we have to accept or not the explanation proposed, but we can modify it or interpret it differently. Alpha Direction allows us to, in some way, to play with the information with the data exposed. We can connect the panels in different ways, reading it not in a chronological order, for example, and these comics create a sort of syncretic discourse or interdisciplinary discourse that merge scientific data, phenomenon, and their resonances across the history of mankind. I have to specify that the 2 comics that I proposed here have different targets and have been created for different purposes and audiences. However, the first one is more based, as I said, on the written text, avoiding the rhetoric and the recombinant possibilities offered by comics in the art. To fully exploit the possibilities of comics in science, teaching and dissemination too, especially regarding complex phenomena, I wasn't sure.
Apologies, maybe. So can everybody see the slides now? So we're sharing.
We're sharing a small. Oh, that's it. That's in the
Oh, how long is this? Can you see it now?
yes.
Oh, very sorry.
No, it's maybe, I think it's probably my fault. I shared the books.
Yeah.
I wasn't checking.
It was hard for you to check.
Just to summarize, maybe you heard me, but you didn't see the images. So on the left, you can see the first sample with the written text predominant. On the right side, you can see the other sample. So I can continue from to fully exploit the possibilities of comics in science teaching and dissemination. To fully exploit the possibilities of comics in science teaching and dissemination, especially regarding complex phenomena, we have to change a bit our reading habits, taking advantage of the different narrative structures and concepts, such as those derived from studies in ergodic narratives and non-linear narratives too, in general. Comics layout can be very complex, but the so-called waffle grid, as you can see here, a regular and usually symmetrical structure can produce complex and non-linear narratives too, with less effort. The most important difference with a written text here is that the latter doesn't allow us to create synchronic contemporary reading paths, while images do. In other words, we can say that we can't read two sentences at the same time, but we can see two or more images at the same time. This is another example. Is a comic. There is a photo, a comics by Alexis Becoulard. A comics where the reader is the light itself. Page after page, we see the travel of a photon through different materials and the aphorism until the eye of the reader, reading it sequentially from left to right and from top to bottom as we can do with a written text. It is the so-called Z path that we can see here. So from left to right and from top to bottom is the usual way to read a comic. But when we read comics sequentially, so panel after panel in this order, at the same time we look at the word page. So the local and the global, the particular and the general are available to us at the same time. All the panels are connected to each other, not only on the page, but along the workbook. Simplifying, the panels happen to the reader both as a sequential progression, but also at synchronicity moments. For example, we can read this famous short story by Robert Crumb, which tells the evolution of a corner of the United States across the years as a progression following the number. But nothing prevents us from jump from a panel to another, creating unexpected connection among the panels and using them to make hypotheses. For example, we can connect two different moments, or reading it vertically, or in a reverse mode, for example, to find different narrative and conceptual paths through this story. One's soul and how things work out make this concept more evident. On the double pages of the first example, we can follow the leaves of 18 characters living in different historical periods. We can easily compare their stories, finding similarities, differences, and resonances. Suppose we can say that we are reading different contemporary histories through the time to find recurrent elements that we could compare. In that case, we can also say that we are reading the same story, the story of a human life, for example, through different historical, cultural, and social contexts. How things work out, another short story. We can follow the same story regarding the same group of characters across time, and we can choose which reading strategy we prefer to apply. In fact, by reading it horizontally, we can follow the story chronologically and differently. Reading it vertically, we can move across decades back and forth in time. But to have a complete and satisfying impression of the story, we can choose, but we must follow all the proposed paths. We have to do comparison, go back and forth across the page, read certain passages. In a certain way, we have to decipher this kind of narrative structure more than reading it. This deciphering operation leads us to explore new possibilities, make new and sometimes unexpected comparisons, and have a non-passive attitude that can be very useful in approaching a scientific text. Furthermore, that will make it possible to describe complex range of interconnected nonlinear phenomena that extend over large scales in terms both of time and space. In fact, comics create time and space. This double page from Mono and Lobo shows how a comics page can be considered both a narrative, a fairy tale in this case, and a sort of ecosystem. In this collaboration, we can see the different paths that the characters, the group of characters, are following through the story and how they interconnect with each other. Is a sort of a map, cartographic or a cartography of times that tell a story but show data and how these data interconnect with each other. In fact, if a written text describes a phenomenon named in times, we can see that words called strings. In comics, space and times are interconnected in a multi-linear way. Sorry for my French, Invincible, we can see a narrative structure that just comics allows us to create. The grid is regular, not totally symmetrical, but regular. The narrative structure is apparently simple, and it seems to follow the Z path. But at a closer look, we see that the panels are connected in a non-linear way. Events on the present influence the future, becoming events of the past that are influencing the present, just as the future, now the new present of the narration, modify the past, and so on. The interconnection of space and time create articulated multi-layered narratives. This can be particularly useful for describing complex phenomena, or for example, that Timothy E.L calls hyperobject. So something that is so vast that is beyond human comprehension. The most famous hyperobject is global warming. Here is a more than 300 pages comic book that describes a corner of a room across billions of years from an endemic prehistoric age to a far and inhabitable future. On each page, panels open temporal windows through time, telling the same place through several time paths, allowing us to understand how and why something is happening or will happen, visualizing the chain of the asynchronous and not chronological chain of events that compose the object that we call here, the corner of the room. Maybe not by chance, the events that makes the Earth unsuitable for life is a flood, a climate disaster, whose complex causes we can try to reconstruct through the clues left in the book. Comics merge space and time in a unique way that is mostly precluded by other media or narrative structures. The comics' capacity to create complex narrative objects could be particularly useful in science teaching, working together with the traditional text, especially to represent certain phenomena that are not linear and stratified. More complex layouts, like those that you can see, could allow for explaining more complex phenomena, avoiding the limitation of the linear media and overcoming some linguistic barriers. Some points on my future research regarding for which scientific explanation are comics best suited and which structures in particular. Can comics be accepted as a reliable method to teach and disseminate science in academia? How can scholars and comics makers fruitfully collaborate to produce more reliable science comics? Thank you.